turn this light off. Again, I had a great response to my last live on trauma and the paranormal, and people had great conversations and a lot of great observations. Susan Demeter, who has a Canadian UFO researcher who has a blog, Out of My Mind's Eye, and she's also published several books, made the observation. She has been very interested in the Philip experiment over a number of years. And she pointed out that that is an interesting example because they did have a great psi expression. They did it on purpose, and all the participants had been screened to make sure that they didn't have any psychological issues going into the experiment because they, were being responsible. So I thought that was another great example of, you don't have there doesn't have to be that link between trauma and psi expression. So today I wanted to talk about Mae Brussels because very happily she's been getting a lot more attention these days, and I'm excited about that. First of all, I'd like to, before I forget, I have a headache, I'm doing terrible, I always feel like I'm apologizing to you guys. So I was like, pay no attention to the woman behind the curtain. But there was an excellent show on her and her life and work and her influences on the Farm Mach 2 podcast with Recluse. Guests were Laura Shapiro and a special guest, and they really get into her background, the context of the times. They are getting together a research library of her research materials, and that is an excellent, excellent introduction to Mae Brussels. This is going to be more of an oral history, me speaking off the cuff and me speaking about my own personal remembrances of her. I never met her, but I did listen to her from probably around late 70s, 1980, until she died in 1988. And so I'm going to be talking about what it was like, because I think nowadays, I mean, it's understandable. This is how things go, right? You get people who are looking at her and critiquing her as a historian and as an conspiracy theorist, things that she got right, places where she looks gullible, other things, and it's a very different experience of engaging with her and her work than at the time that she was alive and producing it. So I want to try and convey that a little bit from my own example. Part of this is prompted. Weird reads with Emily Louise has been having live YouTube groups or broadcast live YouTubes with guests, and they're all really great and really fantastic. She had Adam Gorightly on just, I think it was yesterday. They touched on Mae Brussels. All of these are, it's excellent history, excellent analysis, and very entertaining and fun. Everyone in the chat is like really great, has a lot of interesting things to say, and a really nice, fun group. A great way to engage with the weird. But they were kind of fumbling a little bit with Mae Brussels, and I realized I had a lot to say, and I realized that I've been hearing about her for a number of years, and I keep feeling like I have a lot to say, so I thought, well, maybe I should get off my fat rear end and say it, although I actually am sitting. So be that as it may. But what kind of struck me was that Adam Gorightly characterized Mae as a bored housewife, and then within like 30 seconds I mentioned that she'd been having this torrid affair with Henry Miller, and I'm like, you're bored, but at the same time you're having this affair with like one of the most outrageous, notorious, avant-garde, boundary breaking, influential writers of the 20th century, who is also specifically known for being banned from the United States for many decades because of the frank way he depicted sex in his books. So I can't, I'm having a hard time reconciling that with being a bored person. According to everyone, he was not a boring person in that way. Probably not my cup of tea. I would rather raid his closet um, than anything else, but to each their own. At any rate, this is part of what's so fascinating about Mae Brussels is that she really lived an outsized life. She did an incredible amount of groundbreaking and I think very important research, but she also had this just wild personality that really came through, especially back then. Now, how I came to know of her and her work, I don't remember. Um, it was a very different media landscape back then. I know people say this a ton of times, but it really was. There was a lot more homogenization, like you had like at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the big national newspapers. You had the wire services like the AP and Reuters that would send out, they would have these bureaus all over the world. And journalists, you had a lot more journalists back then. They had a lot more standardized training. They had a lot more resources to do ongoing reporting. Um, and you had like the big three networks that would have their major news broadcasts on TV and also on radio. You had regional newspapers as well as very local newspapers. And this is all, I don't want to say, it's very homogenous. A lot more people were like plugged into this, right? If you only have three news channels that you can watch on the TV, people are going to be a lot more watching all the same news. And you would get kind of consistent coverage. It would be like based on an AP story, and that AP story would be broadcast. You'd hear it on our local CBS AM news radio, the various big network evening news shows. It would be picked up by local newspapers and so on. Okay, so you have this kind of what I think a lot of people are striving for nowadays, and has been formed by that. This would be like in the 60s, 70s, 80s. The idea of objective news reporting, where you have this analysis that is outside of politics and is based on ascertainable facts, documentation, chain of evidence, this type, like a type of thing that you would present in court, possibly. And that had, grew in as like journalism departments in major universities became standardized in the United States in the 20th century. At the same time, now, I was born in Fresno, moved up to the East Bay in the mid 1960s, and we spent a lot of time in Berkeley, some in San Francisco, Oakland, and this was a time of great political turmoil. I mean, my mom went to a lot of anti-Vietnam War demonstrations. She'd always try and leave before got gassed. Luckily, she had a good sense for that. You had the United Farm Workers organizing and boycotting. You had co-ops coming together so people could buy groceries in a more communal way, as opposed to just being at the mercy of corporate food supplies. There was a lot of radical politics happening in and around Berkeley. You had the free speech movement, which was tied in with the anti-Vietnam War movement and war resistance. You had the rise of feminism. You had the disability rights and accessibility movements, which have been incredibly influential. So you get, people that, you're just like, you're fine, you're just in a wheelchair. and now you have ramps, so you can like go places, and you're not just stuck at home. Um, so there was a lot of political ferment, and so you had these alternative media outlets, which were more overtly political, and they were operating at a different level of, let's say, market saturation, reaching a different number of people than these huge corporate outlets. So you have like Pacifica Radio, KPFA, which was formed in the camps for conscientious objectors to the Second World War. And one of the main, I don't know if it was actually started in Berkeley or not, but one of the first outlets was there in Berkeley. You have you'd have like weekly newspapers like the East Bay Express, or you'd have High Times, or all these kind of like newspapers that were coming out like weekly or whatever. They could be paid, they could be freed. You'd have university newspapers, college radio stations, and then you have kind of like the UC or University College stations, Cal State University System stations, which are kind of a notch down in influence, and then you have like community college radio stations. So somehow I found Mae Brussell and Dave Emery on KFJC, which is Foothill Junior College, which is in Los Altos, which is very close to Palo Alto, but it is a junior college. I don't know if, because in 1980 I graduated from high school, went down to UC Santa Cruz, and was there in Santa Cruz for a couple of years going to school. I don't know if I found out about her at UC Santa Cruz, or, and this is another thing, you would have, like, if you got like the newspaper, there would be, well, in San Francisco they had something called the pink section, which sounds completely perverted now that I'm saying it, but we just grew up with it, and it was the entertainment section, and it was published weekly on pink newsprint instead of regular white newsprint or off-white. And it would have a little section in there. This sounds so corny now, but it would have like all of the numbers of the radio stations that were broadcast in the Bay, that you could get in the Bay Area, along with their call signs, right? So this is how you could just like try out various radio stations and know about them. But another way that you would know about it is that you would have a radio, and it would be analog instead of digital. So actually, for once, my analog clock will come in handy, right? So you can, if you want to indicate a time here on this clock, right, you can twirl the back, which I can't do because I only have two arms and hands, and so you can kind of go between all of the numbers that way. So radio dials used to be that way, where you would have a dial and you could sweep through all the various stations. And so if you were young and bored, you go over to kind of to the left hand of the AM of the FM dial, because that would be where all the kind of low frequency and low money and like a lot of college stations and stuff would be. So sometimes you just like kind of go over there and see what was happening. We sound like we really didn't have anything to do back then. But you would go and kind of sweep around and check out. And the other aspect of this is that now I would be very dedicated to listening to Mae and Dave Emery. You can only get certain radio stations are not quite in range, or only kind of on the edge of the range of you being able to receive them. When it becomes night, the signal fades due to the atmosphere. Don't ask me to explain it at this point. I used to be able to, not now. And so it'll fade out. So we would tune in. We would usually be able to hear Mae and like the first hour and a half of Dave Emery's show. But to get it, now, my sister and I were listening in Berkeley at this time. We'd have to both lay down on our beds, like in a certain position, and then we had a um, ironing board, right? So that also acts as an antenna. We had to put the radio set on that ironing board at a certain angle, and then have the actual antenna pointing I think kind of towards one of us. So it was like this whole kind of like ritual setup. And luckily at that point we had cassette tape recorders that could record off the radio. So we'd set the tape and record it, and then you could listen to it again over the week. Um, and cassette tapes you could record on both sides, but they were a little bit expensive, so you'd be using them over and over again, and then they would start to bleed through, which actually sounded kind of cool, but it could be like a quality issue. Why would people go to this type of ridiculous activity once a week to listen to Mae Brussell? Okay. The other part of the media landscape was that, right, we didn't have C-SPAN back then, right? We didn't have the internet, right? Now, if you want to go see the proceedings of something that has happened that is public in the halls of Congress, right, it's going to be broadcast. There's going to be written transcripts that you can access. Back then, this was not the case. You had to have reporters go there and transcribe it, and then they would, report excerpts or whatever in the paper, or you'd have like small audio clips or whatever on the radio or TV. So there wasn't that type of access. Now, one of the things that Mae did was that she bought all the transcripts of the Warren Commission that had been looking into JFK's assassination. She analyzed them, and then she reported on that and read a lot of that stuff into the record. Like David Murray says that a lot of that stuff, I'm reading this into the record, which sounds super corny now because everyone's like, you could just go like look it up online. Back then, you could not. I heard a lot of reporting about the Jonestown massacre from Dave Emory, and he was reading congressional testimony that he had obtained onto the radio, and then people would tape it, and that was how you accessed it. Because there's only like a limited number of, if you have like physical copies, and you want to try and request it from the library physically. I mean, back then you'd have books that books by popular authors that schlocky things that people knew everyone's gonna want to read it. So the libraries would order a bunch of copies, and still it could be several months if you put your request in before you were able to obtain a copy, right? Because there's just only so much circulation that can happen. So Mae and Dave, this was actually very interesting information that was very difficult to obtain that they were able to provide. And so that was a lot of the appeal. I remember hearing a lot of information about psychological operations as regarding the coup in Chile. There's a book, and I can't remember the name of it, and I can't find it online, but it was about the assassination of Orlando Letelier, which happened in 1976 in Washington, D.C. He was the Chilean ambassador, and he and his aide, Ronnie Moffat, and her husband, Michael Moffat, were in a car that was blown up specifically to assassinate him, because this was after the 1973 coup d'etat, which deposed the democratically elected Allende in Chile. And this happened in Washington. Ronnie Moffat and Orlando Letelier were both murdered. So this book got into a lot of the psychological operations that had been used to help prepare the ground for the 1973 coup d'etat. And it was information that I had not heard elsewhere, and it took me 3 or 4 years after he had been reading from this one particular book on his show for me to go and find a copy of it at Cal State Hayward at that time, actually. So that was part of the appeal of these shows, and that was part of what they're doing. And I want to get into now May's personality and background a little bit. She was an eccentric and a kook, and she was born into a situation where she had a particular background which gave her a political viewpoint. The Farm show goes into this and does a great job. She had a particular political viewpoint, and she was able to pursue whatever she wanted because of her position. Now, she was an heiress to the I. Magnin department store money. I. Magnin was founded by her grandfather or great-grandfather, and we used to go there when I was growing up, like in the 60s and 70s. It went out of business at some point, and it was incredibly elegant, incredibly high tone. It was like it's more like Nordstrom's, Macy's. No, it was like Neiman Marcus level, but much more elegant. And they had their own house brands, and still to this day, if people are thrifting around here and you see an I. Magnin label, the whole store comes over to check it out. Everyone. They made beautiful things, high quality, also very stylish, up to date. Also, I believe that Isaac, who started I. Magnin, had a brother Joseph, so there was like a Joseph Magnin store as well. So they were very successful, very popular. There is, at this point, I don't know, it may end up dying now that Macy's is in trouble, but Macy's took over I. Magnin. It was right on Union Square in San Francisco. Very elite real estate, in not just in the nation but worldwide. And they had these incredible bathrooms that were all this gorgeous green Italian marble with kind of verdigris mirrors and marble washstands with gold-plated handles and fixtures, chandeliers. Incredible. Every time we went there, we could never afford anything there, but my mom would always take us there just to use the bathrooms because they were that swanky. And there's still one. It's such a strange. It's like a portal. You go and it's like kind of tacky, whatever Macy's stuff, and then you walk into this. It's kind of decrepit and rotting, but still really elegant, just like blast from the past in there. But she was an heiress to this, so she had money. She was very well connected because, of course, a lot of famous people, starlets, as well as artists and stuff, were living in the same area and in the same circles, partly because I. Magnin was so stylish and chic and elegant. So a lot of people who were like movie stars and stuff would go there to help with their image. And she lived in, very expensive, desirable areas along the West Coast. She also came from a family that was Jewish, and after World War II, I had a number of families and people that I was friends with who were Jewish, and it's just like horrible. And all their kids are traumatized because of, when your entire family, is murdered in horrible ways, and, going through, work camps, concentration camps, jails and stuff. It's just a horrible experience. And we're still seeing the ramifications of that to this day. But so she had a very anti-fascist viewpoint. She was interested in civil rights and artistic freedom. So when she started her radio show, the whole idea of objective journalism was being taken care of by, like the New York Times and all these other things, outlets. But what there wasn't was people digging into these nooks and crannies and looking at these things from an anti-fascist perspective. There, we like to think of history as, okay, something happened, and a lot of kind of objective, the whole idea of the objective journalism class and pursuit partakes of the same viewpoint, right? Things have happened. We can go and find the documents of what happened, and then we reconstruct what the truth was, which is fine. I don't have like well, actually, I do have a problem with it because this privileges certain actors and certain people, right? The people who are able to write things down and have enough stability and money in their lives to preserve this, right? I was actually watching the Netflix Files of the Unexplained last night. They were talking about the Myrtle Plantation, and they have a historian there who brought up this exact situation, right? We can't know as much about the lives of the slaves. Why is this, right? It's because the plantation owners in the South of slavery, they were the ones who controlled the narrative. They were able to write things down. They were able to preserve their history, right? So the whole idea of objectivity in history is uh, problematic. I hate I hate to say it. I know people aren't going to want to listen to this or hear it, but I mean, there's a lot of people that don't have their history around, and it's because it has been ripped away from them. So if you just go on what can be proven, then you're privileging certain voices, and they're the voices of the privileged. Of course, this can also work the other way. If you have journalists who were actually, we had some of those in the 60s and 70s, and this is part of what happened. People who were trying to document other angles of, for example, the Vietnam War, finding out what what was going on with that burglary in the Watergate Hotel that looks a little hinky, right? So that can be important too. But at the time that May was doing her radio show, she was coming at it from the angle of not of looking at patterns in past history with a view to avoiding these same patterns coming up, right? So instead of waiting until we can be absolutely sure, we can make a rock solid case about what happened, it's like, let's look at these patterns and see what they can tell us about processes that are happening now by people and organizations that are acting possibly in bad faith, possibly with agendas in mind that they want to keep hidden because people aren't going to want to, people don't like their agenda, and get this information out there so it's more action, like as opposed to like a potted history or an objective truth, looking for actionable intelligence to resist these fascist right-wing anti-freedom elements. So of course that is going to be different, and it's not going to in every instance hold up to, okay, what is the objective truth? I mean, she wasn't trying to in my opinion, she was an activist and she was politically motivated, and she had a side that she was rooting for and a side that she was trying to support. And because she was outside of the kind of a larger corporate media ecosphere, she was able to pursue this. And also, she just had this fabulous, outsized, wild, kooky, eccentric personality. So she was also able to just pursue ideas that just interested her. She didn't have a boss to answer to, and things that she thought were fascinating. And um, I have to say, too, that it's interesting to listen to people talk about her now, because if you go and listen to her shows, my sister and I just, we'd always be listening. She always had like some just like completely wacky, hilarious, just like off the wall thing she would say in every show, and so we were always listening for it, and then we'd just be repeating it to one another. And I remember one time I forget what she was researching even, but she said, I was finding so much information that I had to get like 11 by 18 pieces of paper because it just wasn't fitting on the regular like 8.5 by 11. And it's just like, that makes no sense. It tells you everything you need to know about Mae Brussell. She's just amazing. I'm gonna look at my notes here for a minute and see what I have missed. Yeah, I think that she was very much of her time. She really pursued life. This is another thing that kind of bugged me about the bored housewife comment, because she married, and I think she raised 5 kids. I've never had kids, but I was a kid, and believe me, like we ran our mom and dad ragged all the time. There were just 3 of us. I remember one time in particular, we had a very nice young lady from the neighborhood come to babysit us, and as soon as my dad pulled up, it was only a couple hours, she just like ran crying out down the street, because we're just kids. They take a lot of attention, and smart, creative, and we were just, I don't know why, but we were just like super, always had a lot of energy, and we're getting up to stuff. And so I can imagine having her hands full with 5 kids. But if you know a number of people who have gone through life and had the benefit of getting older and having a little more time and money, yeah, then you can pursue things that you wanted to pursue, through your life. I didn't really get into uh, like sitting with gurus and sitting in meditation groups and everything till I was in my early 30s. But it was because the way that my life had been structured to that point, I didn't have a lot of extra money. My health wasn't super great. I had like family and friend obligations and stuff. And so, my dad was funny because he didn't start playing golf till he was, I don't know, I think around late 40s or 50s, and he's been big golfer since then. And he said he always knew he wanted to do it, but he just didn't have the time. So then when he had the time, he pursued it. And the same with he and my bonus mom have Swedish Valhounds, which are like these herding dogs. They're thought to be like ancestors to corgis. And they have these dogs, they've had them for several years, and they do like herding training with them. And my dad knew from the time he was quite young that he always wanted to have a dog that he could have that type of working dog relationship with. But it took a long time, until he was probably in his 70s, that he was able to pursue it. And it's not like he was bored. It's something he always wanted to do, but he just couldn't, fit it in. He didn't have life circumstances where he could do this. So I think it's kind of insulting to just say that, well, someone, I guess they just got bored, and then, especially if you listen to the farm episode, May had been very interested in these type of political issues from the, throughout her life. And so she finally was in a place where she could pursue these things. And yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if this will be helpful to anyone, but I just feel like I just wanted to get out some of what it was like for me. She was so obscure too. I think sometimes, like I was reading a little bit about her on the web, and they will bring up like a couple of interviews that were done with her, and the fact that I guess John Lennon and Yoko Ono helped fund some of her research, and it makes her sound like she was a lot more prominent during her lifetime than she was. I'd never met anyone else who listened to Mae Brussell until after she died, besides me and my sister, because it was she was just obscure. And when I look back and I think, gee, I mean, I almost swore, sorry. I mean, I was in Berkeley, and I knew like a ton of people into weird stuff, going to like weird bookstores and stuff, and it was just a very small interest group back then. Um, and she was speaking to a pretty small audience, and I'd be fascinated to if someone has analyzed that more. But she became a lot more popular and well known after she died, which was terrible. I mean, she's not really old, but she packed a lot of living into her time on Earth. Chasing around Henry Miller of all people on top of everything. I don't know. I wish I had half her energy. Um, Plus, I mean, she's living. I mean, I feel like, she's like living in Carmel by the Sea. It's like one of the most gorgeous places on earth. She has a lot of money. She knows all these fancy people. She has her own radio show. She has the resources that she can, like subscribe to clipping services, and she's not answering to anyone about what she's doing. Bonin and Henry Miller is, I feel like you should listen to the Holy Donut Revival Hour. One of the co-hosts is SJ, and she's perfect. She'd be perfect. She needs to make a GIF of Mae Brussels with the Queen or the crown emoji on, and then the sunglasses coming down. Because she did what she wanted, and she's what she wanted, and did it her way, and yeah, I think she's really inspiring, especially for women in these arenas. There's been somehow even more worse BS going on around with women in these arenas being harassed and doxxed and threatened. Men, you should maybe, instead of sneering at bored housewives, speak up about how we shouldn't be harassing and doxing people in this community. Just a suggestion. Anyway, if you've made it this far, again, bless you. Thank you. As you could probably tell, my brain's not too good today, but I wanted to talk about Mae and the media ecosystem as it was back then, how different it was, and how I think it influenced what she was doing, as well as with, she wasn't a historian, she was an activist. And she had a very particular political point of view, and she did what she could to give people the tools that they needed to become activists and become involved and aware of things that are important for us to know as citizens, and people in political arena, to try and avoid some horrible things that have happened and can happen, and try and preserve our rights and the rights of those around us. So thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a great day, and just go out there and live life with passion, pursue what you want, and pour one out for me.